Hello, welcome back for lesson 5.4. We are going to look at the trigonometric functions of any angle. So we're going to start by talking about our reference angle. So our reference angle is always referring back to either 2 pi or you can start with pi, but all of our reference angles are always referring to an angle between 0 and pi. So for instance, if we look at number 9, it is this angle here, which that means that cosine is a -1 and sine is a negative square root of 3. They're both negative. Okay, so it helps if we know the reference angle. So the reference angle would be, what would that same angle be going down if you go up to the x-axis? And so, and then we're going to refer to that actually back in between 0 and pi over 2. So when cosine is a -1 and sine is square root of 3, we are that means our hypotenuse is a 1. And so over on the x is a -1 and then down a square root of 3. Okay, so let's write here. So our sine is asking us to find the exact values of each of these. So sine is a square root of 3 and negative square root of 3. Cosine is a -1. Tangent would then be a negative square root of 3 over a -1, which becomes out to be a positive square root of 3. And the cosecant is going to be 1 over a negative square root of 3. But when we rationalize that, it will become a negative square root of 3 over 3. So that's negative. And then secant is going to be the reciprocal of a -1, which is just a -1. And the cotangent will be the reciprocal of a square root of 3, which will be the square root of 3 over 3. Okay. Number 13 shows us our angle here is a negative angle. And we're referring to this little bit here where we're at the point 1 and 4. So sine is 4, cosine is 1. So they're both positive. So tangent is always sine over cosine. So that's going to be 4. Cosecant is always the reciprocal of sine. So that's 1/4. And secant is the reciprocal of cosine, which is going to be 1. And cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, which is 1/4. Okay. Let's look at number 17. Number 17. They gave us that secant has to be, the secant of the angle has to be less than 0. So secant has to be less than 0. And the tangent has to be greater than 0. Okay, so that means tangent has to be greater than 0. So either sine and cosine have to both be positive, or they both have to be negative. So that happens in the first quadrant and then the third quadrant, where they're both positive in the first, both negative in the third. And then secant is 1 over cosine, which means that is when cosine is either, and we need that to be negative. So that's when cosine is negative, is going to be in the second or the third. And so where they overlap is in the third quadrant. So that's what we're looking at, is in the third quadrant. And you know what? I'm going to go back to 13 for just a moment, actually, because it's not going to be quite as simple as I had here. So if we go back to 13, draw our right triangle. Cosine is 1 and sine is 4. So that is true. So we're looking for C, our hypotenuse. So C we said was the square root of A squared plus B squared. So C is equal to the square root of 1 squared plus 4 squared. So C is equal to the square root of 17. So sine really should have been the opposite over the hypotenuse, which would be 4 over square root of 17. But when we rationalize that, it's 4 times the square root of 17 over 17. Cosine should have been 1 over the hypotenuse. So that would have been 1 over square root of 17. And so that would have been a square root of 17 over 17. Then cosecant would be the square root of 17 over 4. This would have been, secant would be the square root of 17. Sorry about that. And then tangent would be 4 and cotangent would be 1/4. Okay. 21 is asking us for, find the reference angle. So the reference angle, because we're at the angle of 120, is in the second quadrant. And if you go back from 180 to the 120 is a 60 degrees. So our reference angle for sine of, for 21, 120, that reference angle is a 60-degree angle. So they want us to know, what is the reference angle according to the first quadrant? 25 is a negative 105. So it's in this, it's in the third quadrant. So we're going to do a negative 180 basically, plus or subtracting a 105. So that difference is going to be a 75-degree angle. And then 7 pi over 4 for number 29 is again going to be just over pi. And it's equal to 4 pi over 4 pi plus 3 pi over 4 pi. So it's actually 1 pi and almost 3/4. So it's not this one, it's actually it's 3/4. So it's right there at 7 pi over 4. So it's 1 pi and 3/4 of a pi. So it would be right here. So 29 is actually a pi over 4 because it's just a pi over 4 away. So this right here is the reference angle of pi over 4. So catch me back for the last half of the lesson.